Hello, and welcome to Relationships Rewired, real conversations, real connections. I'm Rachel, a trauma therapist, a coach, a wife, a mom, and someone who believes in the power of authentic connections.
And I'm Kory Ann, also a therapist, a relationship coach, a mom, and a wife, here to dive into the complexities of our relationships with ourselves and each other.
From understanding the equalities of our attachments, nurturing the bonds of our family ties, and strengthening partnerships, we're here to have real, honest conversations.
So get comfy, because whether you're looking for guidance, practical tips, or an occasional laugh, join us as we navigate the beautiful, messy world of relationships together.
Welcome back to Relationship Rewired. Today, we're going to talk about the most important relationship that we have throughout our lives, a relationship to self.
That's a big one. As we were listening to our reviewing our podcast from last time, I was laughing at myself because my introduction, as I said, is most often in relationship to others, where my relationship is with others. And that's how I see myself. That's how I tell people who I am. So we thought how important it was to pause on this before we get into the relationship with others. What is our relationship with ourselves?
Yeah. And how do we develop it throughout our lifetime? We talk in our culture about this concept of self-love and identity and self. And I don't know that culturally we're talking about what that really means. I think we've been talking about the roles that we play for so long that it's hard to sort of step back and see, like, who are we outside of those roles? And you beautifully describing that.
Thanks. I think that comes in a huge piece with what the expectation of me was, right? Or what the expectation of us has been in our lives. Well, I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a business partner because I know myself in relationship, which is okay and good. This isn't about this is bad to know yourself in that way, but it is saying, do I know myself without those things too?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Who am I outside of these identities that I show to the world? Who am I outside of being a mother? Who am I outside of being a wife? And today we want to really dive into that and how we develop these identities throughout our lives, these roles that we play. And yeah.
And how then, if that's the recognition or what we were recognizing, how then do we go about or think about cultivating our authentic self?
Hmm. Yeah.
How are we exploring in a because it's hard and scary
Yeah.
to say, I'm gonna shift to focusing on my authentic self when I've known myself this way. So how are we to go about cultivating that self?
Yeah. That's a great question. How have you come to a place where you started to see that you've been playing these roles throughout your life, and how have you started to shift?
Great question. I was thinking about that a little bit, and again, laughing at myself. This is something I've become great at is recognition, and it's taken some work. Let me just say that it's taken work to say, "Wow, look at the way I've been, and can I laugh about that and feel okay that my journey has been not perfect, or I've fallen short in ways that I would do it differently now." And this being one of those cases that I was, selling makeup at a cosmetics, and they are having us introduce yourself, and I'm going through my mind, okay, been married this long, I'm a wife, I have this many kids, and then they said, introduce yourself without telling us who your relationships are, tell us who you are, and I didn't know what to say. I was like, I was so grateful there was a room full of women to introduce themselves first because I didn't know what to say. I didn't know who I was without those relationships. That was a scary, hard moment for me because I went home and I remember talking to my husband saying, I, I don't know what I like. I don't know who I am without these relationships.
Yeah.
And these relationships are so important in my life. They're going nowhere. They weren't, but they are a huge part of me. But if I can't even say, I like to read, here's the kind of food I want, or like, here's the movies I like. It's taken it's taken so long and in a relationship for my husband to help me to say, what do you want to do?
Mm,
For me to be like, I don't know what I want to do. I actually have no idea because I haven't had to think about that.
yeah. Yeah.
And so his challenging of that a little bit has been helpful of like, no, giving it back. You tell me what you want to do. And it's been this panicky feeling at times because that's not been my role.
Yeah. Yeah. As you're talking about this, it actually makes me think about this idea of sort of being an object, right? A psychodynamic lingo. So what does that mean? It means like you are just there to serve others versus having a self, right? And this can happen in unhealthy, toxic relationships, often early parental relationships, where we don't actually have or are allowed to have a self. We're sort of a reflection of what others want us to be. And so as you're describing it, and not to say all of this happens for everyone, but um you're describing it, I'm thinking about how common this is that we're like, oh no, you choose. It doesn't matter. I can eat anything. So even from a cultural perspective, again, community perspective, we learn to do this as women as well. Like, it doesn't matter what I want. I'm here to serve others. And so I'm hearing your husband challenged you to say, like, no, who are you? Because I don't want you just to be what I want you to be.
Yeah.
I want you to be who you are.
Which was part of the problem, right? Because him saying, I want you to be who you are. And I'm like, oh.
Because you didn't have to be it before,
Nope.
or maybe no one had expected that of you.
Right. And you spoke to it really beautifully. And I say this, my siblings are some of my very best friends. They are amazing, and I love them dearly. And my job was, as the oldest, to take care of them, right?
Yeah.
So if my job was to take care of them in my family of origin, why then suddenly when I was challenged at this conference, would I know myself any differently?
Mhm, mhm.
Have you had those things happen?
Well, I think we can relate, which is also interesting because our family systems are so different and then maybe have some flavors of similarity. But being the oldest of six for you, seven. Oh, I cut one out. Sorry. Oldest of seven. And I was the youngest of three. So, from that perspective, you would think it would be very different. Of course, I definitely have baby tendencies. Let's we be clear. Um, and although I have baby tendencies, I found myself being in the role of caretaker. So we had a family system that was pretty mentally ill. And because of that, I found ways and taking on specific roles in order to keep myself safe. And I imagine the same was true for you, that we take on even caretaker roles. It helps us. One, for me, it helped me feel like I existed in the world with importance, right? If there was neglect within the family system and I could take on a specific role of being a caretaker to a brother who was pretty mentally ill, well, then it gave me some purpose, where the rest of the system was so challenged, right? They were in their own chaos of trying to navigate the hardships of their life. And I'm not saying this critically. And I found a way that I could be sort of purposeful. I also found a way to be really purposeful in work. Like work harder, do more. I was a competitive figure skater. I was working multiple jobs, and that was an identity I took on. Um, and and it wasn't until many years later that I realized how harmful it actually was. Um, so yeah, definitely took on those roles, and it wasn't till actually I left my first marriage, which was a 20-year relationship, that I started to see there were ways that I wanted to use the role that I had that I played throughout my life, like being a caretaker, as a mother, but not in relationship with a partner. But what a cracking open that was to say, I don't want to play this role anymore, because it wasn't serving me. And and that really seamlessly flows into this idea of like, are there costs and benefits of playing these roles and playing out an identity that is inauthentic or inconsistent with our true selves?
When you were talking, that really hit my heart strong in a strong way about there's this cracking open and the visual of that because we have curated our roles in life in a way that keep us safe.
Mm.
The reason we have those roles in our families of origin and our family systems is because it kept us safe. Maybe we were seen, maybe we were a helper, maybe we were quiet, maybe we were a scapegoat, maybe we were spirited or rebelled. But in this system, we found a place and a way to fit.
We found belonging.
We found belonging.
Yeah.
And that is one of the biggest things as humans that we look for
Yeah.
is belonging. And in fact, we mask our authentic self in order to belong, which is what part of our problem ends up being later in life is that we find a cracking open of that authentic self is saying, I need to come out. I'm here. I'm still here. Do you see me? And so the idea of we've gone all of these decades in this role or in this because it worked for us, it kept us safe.
Mm.
And we most likely are really good at whatever that role is. So kudos, make space for yourself in that.
Yeah.
Be proud of yourself for whatever role that was, whether you were told it was healthy or unhealthy. Your body, your mind, and your soul are so freaking awesome that it found a way to cope and keep you healthy, strong, safe, and surviving
Mhm.
until we bump into something and it isn't working anymore and we crack open.
Yeah.
And that visual to me just hit in a way of we crack open and how scary that can be because we only know ourselves a certain way. And then when we crack open, we have to make a choice. Do we lean into change
Mhm.
or do we stuff that down more
Yeah.
and keep our life going because it's what we're supposed to do?
Mhm. I actually see this a lot, and that you spoke to it so beautifully. One, I wanna just reiterate, we talk about all these ways that we cope, whether it's cope by being the good girl or overworking or caretaker or even, like, substance use. Like, we find ways to cope food, um, we find ways to cope throughout our lives, and we then shame ourselves for the ways that we've coped. And I just wanna just reflect that back what I heard and share that again because it's so powerful. These ways that we've coped have kept us alive. And as much as we might want to shame them and say, oh, well, I use substances or I was addicted to alcohol. What if that was the only way you survived your life? What if that was the only way to keep you alive? And the hope is that that strategy is no longer necessary. But that comes with safety too. Like, we have to get to a place of safety. We have to get to a place of belonging with something other than a substance in order to say, "I don't need you anymore. I don't need this part of me anymore." So thank you, and yeah, absolutely an important piece to but how do we get to this point? Like, how do we get to a point where we can start to crack open and say, "This part that was so important throughout my life that kept me alive is not actually who I am," and then make a choice to let it go. Holy crap.
It's so huge. Speaking to the addictions piece, when I, when I worked more with that population, there was such an important part to help them understand here it, and well, getting to breaking up with that piece or part. Here's why it worked for you. Alcohol, drugs, food, shopping, whatever the coping mechanism was your best friend. They were there. They were, yep, they were your best friend. You were deeply attached. They're there with you, with, they're with you, next to you, part of you through joy, sorrow, sadness, celebration, loneliness. You pick any emotion or event you went through in your life, and that thing was there for you.
Yeah.
And now you want to break up with it, and you think you're a bad person because you can't break up with it right away.
Yeah.
And to go through this process of, wait a minute, look how awesome I am again to have made it to this point. And now that I recognize that I can be healthier without it, what does this look like? And how and what am I doing to put in its place? Because I still need attachment. So that's why it's so scary. I'm like, I'm getting rid of the attachment that's been there for always and ever. And now I'm empty. So we're looking for attachment in a healthy way after that.
Yeah. Which is interesting. I know we're not talking about addiction in general,
Right.
but not only are we talking about losing the attachment and needing a replacement, we're also talking about changing our systems, our chemical systems, and saying, "Oh, you were going to take this thing away." If you don't have a relationship, which is why AA, why groups are actually really helpful for community, because what they're doing is replacing that attachment, that relationship that's so necessary, especially as you go through the withdrawal of the chemicals, right? So, again, maybe we'll have to do an episode on addiction, but this is a reframe. We're actually asking all of you and ourselves to, like, how do we honor these parts of ourselves versus shame them?
Mhm.
And our family of origins, God love them. They all have their own unique qualities. And often, but whether it's the community we grew up in or our family of origin, these are ways that we have learned roles to play that aren't always healthy.
Mhm. Thank you for tuning in to Relationships Rewired. We hope today's conversation sparked some new ideas for your own connections.
If you liked what you heard, remember to subscribe and share with friends who might benefit from our chats. Leave us a review. Your feedback helps us to reach more listeners just like you.
And remember, building strong relationships takes time and effort, so be gentle with yourself in the process.
Catch you in the next episode.